Well, thank you so much for being here. And yes, wow, I was attacked by a grizzly bear. That's not something you necessarily hear all the time. But this happened to my daughter and myself about 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, this was front page news, right? NBC News. I had this headline on TV. It said, "Hero father saves daughter." I didn't feel like a hero at that point. I just felt like any old dad that, would do what any dad would do. So since that time, my story has been told many different times. I've been reenacted at least 3 times by people that really do not look like me. The bear has been reenacted at least 3 times by a bear that's probably really way too big to be living in nature. And, my story's never really been told by me, and why not, right? Why didn't I write a book like so many other people do? Well, to tell you the truth, to go through something that my daughter and I went through is so emotional, and it's so big in a way. It takes a while before you can actually put those emotions to the side and start thinking about the real essence of what happened to us and why did we survive and why did we thrive afterwards. So I started about 2 years ago, and when you start writing initially, it's a lot of tears, quite honestly. I mean, I just was sob fest, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't write anymore. And it got to a point that my wife actually entered a writing contest. And my wife's an English teacher. And so writing for her is quite natural. For me, it's not. I'm originally from the Netherlands. But so English is my second language, so it's quite different for me. So she wrote a story about the call that she got from my daughter. When I tell this story, I get emotional, right? Because it was such a strong family story that it's very hard to genuinely talk about this without also getting emotional. And I actually don't care anymore. It's okay. I think it helps me to convey the message of my particular story. So what happened? My wife got the call from my daughter. Because after the attack, my daughter and I had an opportunity to kind of talk and say, hey, make sure you call mom, because if the hospital calls right away, she's going to be worried, and we didn't want her to be worried. But she had every reason to be really worried, because this is what happened. My daughter and I were on a graduation trip, graduation from high school. Now, Jenna was one of the people in the, what they call it, the valedictorian circle, right, in high school. So you can tell I'm really proud of my daughter. And she's one of 2 of my daughters, but she was the older one. And anytime we would go hiking on a family vacation, Jen and I always wanted to go past the next mountain. So her request was, Dad, take me on a graduation trip. You can imagine that word graduation trip has been banned from our families ever since this particular trip, because it wasn't a few $1,000 vacation, it became a multi-million-dollar vacation. Because the first day we were in Glacier National Park, and when we went on a hike, we unfortunately ran into a grizzly bear. Now, you think about, Glacier, Montana, the wilds and all that, but quite honestly, when you start on a trail in the national park, we do such a great thing about explaining what you're going to see that it doesn't feel like you're in the middle of the wilderness. But in Montana, you are. The minute you step off the road, you're in the middle of wilderness. There's no more cell phone. None of that modern technology is available. And you need to rely on common sense. Well, I didn't have a lot of common sense, quite honestly. I wanted to take pictures, right? It was a beautiful morning, and it was foggy, and the fog was just lifting from the lake. It was absolutely gorgeous. I'm taking pictures. I'm trying to be quiet because we'd like to see some animals, especially a grizzly bear. Well, when you start this Grinnell Trail, where we got attacked on, it's one of the most popular trails in Glacier National Park. It goes through the forest first, right? And what do we all know as humans, because it's part of our DNA, right, to be afraid of the bear in the forest? The forest is the dangerous part. So we got out of the forest, and you get into a rocky slope, and you can see for miles, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And you basically start thinking, well, it's no longer, you know, the bear in the forest. I can kind of let down my guard. Well, that's actually not true. Bears, especially during that time of year we were there in August, go up to the higher elevation because there's a lot more protein to be found, and they need to fatten up for their hibernation period in the winter. So we're just hiking along. I'm filming a golden eagle. And my daughter's like, come on, Dad, because we wanted to do a second trail in the afternoon. My daughter's ahead of me, and she gets around this rock in the trail. And suddenly she steps back. And just like, you know, your natural instinct when your kid sits next to you in the car and you suddenly have to brake, you reach out, I stepped in front of my daughter because something was coming. She said something like, oh no. And so she stepped back and I stepped in front, being ready to get whatever it was getting into me. And I'm looking at this thing in front of me. And this was quite interesting. Time at that point became a really weird thing because I do not remember the moment between 0 seconds and 0.2 seconds what actually happened. But I vividly remember what happened between 0.2 and 0.7 of a second. Because in that small time frame, which quite honestly seemed like it lasted minutes, something ended up in my thigh. Now, being from Holland, where we don't have bears, I thought, that's a mean old badger. And I kind of looked down, it's like, whoa, what's that? It didn't take much longer, or the second bite came into my thigh, because when bears attack, they don't just kind of attack and then do whatever. They kind of attack to get this person down. And I realized I was being attacked by a grizzly bear, and I had my whole front exposed. Because what do they say when you get, you know, into a dangerous situation? You go into the fetal position. I had no opportunity. But my daughter was behind me, so I had to stand very sturdy and very strong at that point. And I'm a pretty strong guy, but a bear is a big thing getting into your thigh. There was no pain. There was no room in my brain for pain or anything during that point. But being exposed like this, I'm like, I have to jump off the trail. I ended up jumping off the trail. When I was off the trail, I went from a period of incredible violence to a period of incredible silence. And I'm like, okay, it's safe here. So I called for my daughter, Jenna, you have to come down here. But she never heard me. But what I did see was that the bear was getting on the trail and it turned its head and was straight back on top of me. You know, you see those sci-fi movies on TV, right? That they go to soup, 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 soup. That's kind of how it felt. I'd never seen anything move that fast in my life. So now, luckily, I'm in the fetal position. I can go like this. I had a backpack on my back. And the bear's lifting me up and down in my backpack. And the realization starts to set in that Jenna had nothing on her back. I needed to keep this thing with me. So to make a long story short, because this is now going to take another 10 to 15 minutes of being basically with this bear, I ended up taking the bear down with me. We fell straight down about 30 feet. The reason I know I did that, because when I opened my eyes, I had a bear in my hand. Yes, I was looking at a grizzly bear, but that was way close. And I remember thinking to myself, you're really not that good looking up close. Because really strange thoughts come through your mind. They're not necessarily realistic at that point. You're like, okay, I got a bear in my hand, and it really feels like you're pinching like this, quite honestly. It doesn't, you know, you don't have a whole lot to do. The bear was probably about as surprised as I was that we were in that particular position. So with my left hand, I'm trying to grab a stone. I'm like, I'm just going to hit it in the face, right? Well, it's just shale in that part of the Rockies, and that was just going to piss it off if I throw some dust at its face. So I'm like, okay, I'm back in this position. Well, I made it mad, because at that point, that bear was just digging on my skull. It tore off most of my scalp. I felt things breaking in my neck, so I knew something was broken. And I slowly drifted off. And then it's suddenly like, oh, wait a minute, drifting off is not going to happen to me. I need to stay alive for my daughter, but I need to rip myself loose. I ripped myself loose, fell another 25 feet. Bear looked over the edge, and suddenly I was by myself. But not for long, because just a few seconds later, I heard the worst sound a dad could hear. It was my daughter screaming. The bear had gotten to her anyway. And then you snap back. It was a really weird sensation to be there, like having heard that and saying, oh, I can't do anything right now, but maybe I should be really quiet because I do not want to make it any madder. I heard nothing. So I'm looking at my wounds. I had this huge wound in my arm, but I'm a physical therapist by training, so to me this was really interesting because I could see my tendons move, right? I had this scalp hanging in front of me. I'm just going to, let's move that to the side. My right eye was closed. I'm like, okay, I want to make sure that the eyeball isn't hanging out. So I'm feeling over here. So, okay, no eyeball. Okay, good. It's still in there. So open it up like this. I can see Grinnell Lake. I can see it. The rest I can fix with a little surgery. I'm not worried about that. That took probably about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And then I yelled for Jenna. And then I got the best sound in the world, because she yelled back. And the sound was one of power, that I knew she wasn't like terribly injured. I mean, I thought. And I projected my injuries on her. I said, Jenna, how are your eyes? Because I'm thinking, a girl, you know, her face can't be messed up, right? She says, my eyes are fine. I said, good. And I started yelling for help. Now, we were eventually saved off the mountain. We were hospitalized. And that's when the second part of my adventure started. Being hospitalized in the American healthcare system is a very interesting experience. Now, they obviously saved my life. And I maybe should have been dead because I fractured my second vertebrae in my neck to the point that there was too many fractures to be able to count. And yet, I was still walking, I was still standing. It was pretty amazing. I had more than 25 wounds. I'd lost so much blood on the mountain that they could not get my blood pressure anymore at one point, but I was still joking around with everyone. It was pretty amazing. And they put me back together again. The American healthcare system did an incredible job with me. Except the stuff that is not that difficult to do and is not that expensive. Stuff like giving me a little lidocaine before you start screwing the halo into my skull. That was really painful. And I had to remind him, I'm not a bag of potatoes. You know, I'm a person right here. Please don't forget about that. Or the time they forgot to schedule the surgeon to do a surgery on me that had to happen, otherwise it would be, my eye would have been, you know, not working real well. Me as the patient in the hospital bed had to convince that surgeon to go do the surgery. They'd just forgotten to schedule the doc. And to the point that I ended up with MRSA. I ended up with an infection that can easily be solved by everyone please washing their hands. So ultimately, you know, we survived, and there was a lot of lessons I'd learned from this. And it's really interesting, when I tell my story, there's a lot of lessons people take out of it, you know, individually. Because somehow, this attacked by a bear in the forest still sits in our DNA, right? It's exceedingly rare that attacks happen, maybe 10 a year max. Exceedingly rare that people die from it anymore. But yet we're all afraid of it, and yet we're not afraid of something like a hospital-acquired infection, right? MRSA alone kills 30,000 people each year. So what did I do with my story working in a hospital? I used it because the art of storytelling gets to people's heart, right? But I need to convince you also with the facts. We all know the facts. and yet we don't want to listen to the facts. So let me tell you my story. You nearly killed me as well. You nearly killed me because you didn't wash your hands. And so it's been an incredible gift to get this gift of an incredible story. Why I feel it needs to be retold again, but it needs to be retold in my words, and not necessarily the words of, you know, any of the adventure shows that I've been featured on, which, you know, they only focus on the attack piece, really. And that's only half the story. Maybe it's only a quarter of the story. Because the story of overcoming all these things in the hospital, to me, is just as interesting. And of the lessons that we learned, right? The lessons of goal setting, for instance, and of having a vision. Do you think anyone that day on the mountain had to be told what the vision or the mission was in regards to those rescuers? What do you think it was? Get me off alive, right? That simple. Yet there were 60 hikers stuck on the trail. There was a crew trying to rappel me out. There was a helicopter crew in the air. None of those could talk together and say, let's share the vision and the mission. It was very clear to everyone, get me off alive. And they succeeded. And they all celebrated right afterwards, because I have a videotape of someone that, you know, my daughter is getting lifted off the mountain and everyone's clapping. What an incredible thing that happened just in the middle of Montana. That everyone had the same shared vision and mission. Now, in the hospital, I had to set goals for myself. And those goals were always just very focused, and just from one day to the next, because we didn't know really if I was going to make it, right? I had to have many, many surgeries to clean me up, to patch me back together again. And that goal setting, that continued after the hospital as well. Because now I'm out of the hospital. I have my halo on, of course, so that had to come off first. But I'm a natural runner. I love running, and I qualified for Boston a couple of times, and this is great, right? Today's Patriots Day, Boston Marathon this morning. I'll run it again next year. But it took me a while to get back again to that physical goal of being able to run a marathon. But I set that goal for myself and was able to do it 3 years after the fact. I set an educational goal for myself as well. Okay, you always wanted to be a doctorate within your profession. Just do it, because you don't know what lies around the corner, you know, of the next trail you may take. I wanted to professionally be more of a decision maker, more in a leadership position. And that was actually the easiest part, to get a leadership position. Who knew? But, you know, I set my mind to it, and it happened. And that has been an incredible gift, to get that kind of focus after something like this. But, you know, another part of the gift has been that it's been incredible to be an inspiration to others. I had a sister come up to me in the hospital, a nun about this tall, and she looks at my head and she says to me, "Why did he save you?" And I said, "Sister, that's an incredible question. I'm not really sure if I know." And she's like, "You will know." Out of the blue. And I think I know. I think I have to re-gift my gift of having survived this particular event, especially when someone that I didn't know in Florida had my picture on their refrigerator because they wanted to overcome their own struggles and getting back to running again. It's like my picture on your refrigerator to be an inspiration. Incredible. But of course, the greatest part of the story is we as a family stayed whole. You know, luckily I was healthy enough in order to survive this. There's a message in there as well, right? Your health is important, but it's also important to those people around you. And this is where I get emotional. My daughter, Jenna, did great. I mean, she had her lip torn down. She broke her back in 2 spots. Her shoulder was broken. But she went on to become a physician. And she's right now in residency to be an emergency medicine doctor, because she wants to help people just like we were helped by everyone out there. So it's an incredible story. She saved many lives already, and maybe that was part of the purpose as well of us surviving. So thank you for listening, and I hope you will take your own lesson from what we wrote. Thank you.